How can we trust God to do what is best in our lives to the point that we don't act out into what we think is in our own interest, but we move according to His will? That's what we're going to talk about today, and we're going to do that right after this. Good morning, everybody. We're going to talk today about how that we can put our faith and our trust and our hope in the Lord, even in times when our flesh may want us to lean toward our own abilities or our own confidence in our achievements to be able to do what's right. Because many times when we act according to our own ambitions or our own ways of thinking, it may cause us to look for a route that is easier or something that may get us recognition, which may not be the will of the Lord. So to begin with, let's read in Romans chapter 9, beginning in verse 14. And that'll be our verses for today. We'll read 14 through 18 today, but to begin with, we'll read 14 through 16. So, beginning in Romans chapter 9, verse 14, it says, "What shall we say then? Is there unrighteousness with God? Certainly not. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whomever I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whomever I will have compassion. So then it is not of him who wills, nor of him who runs, but God who shows mercy." These verses are a continuation of what we talked about previously in our last lesson, where God was talking about Isaac and Ishmael, and how Isaac was the chosen person by God. And we looked at it, also talked about Jacob and Esau, and how that Jacob was chosen by God. And both Isaac and Jacob were younger than their brothers, and according to the traditions of men at that time, they would have been the first, by being the firstborn, they would have been the leader of the household at the passing away of their fathers. But God chose differently. He did not go according to the eldest in these cases, for reasons that He knows the hearts of men, and He chooses whom He will choose. So if God does that, if God goes according to the traditions of men and the traditions of the time, does that make God unrighteous? Is God unrighteous or unjust if He does something outside the order of what the typical man may desire? Well, of course not. God is not unrighteous, and He's not unjust, because He knows more than we do. And is it wrong with God to show compassion on someone that we may be angry against? Is it wrong for God to show mercy in times when we may want to act out of vengeance according to our own desires or according to man's desires? Well, let's think about it in our case. How many of us have at times in our lives acted in a way where we deserved to be judged, but yet in God's long suffering, He showed mercy toward us? Even when we were walking in sin, or we were walking in rebellion against Him, God still continued to show mercy against us. He did not judge us at that time, but showed grace and kindness toward us in order that we could draw closer to Him at the appointed time. So it's not wrong for God to show mercy and to show grace and kindness to whom He desires to. And the reason why is because God is not obligated to do something according to what we want. And there's a teaching today in the Word of Faith movement where people are taught that they can claim something from God, that if they do such and such, that God is obligated to act according to their will. Well, God is not obligated to act just because we want something. When we looked at that previous verse, verse 16, where it says, "So then it is not of him who wills, nor of him who runs, but God who shows mercy." That word wills means our desire. It's not just because we have a desire for something that God would be obligated to do it. He is not obligated to us in that respect. He's not obligated, and we cannot put God in a place to be obligated in a way to show us a reward for our performance, because it's not just because we want something or because we act a certain way that we earn something. So it's not by our desires and it's not by our works that we are shown grace and kindness and mercy. It's God himself that shows grace and kindness and mercy toward us out of his long suffering and his desire for us to eventually turn and to serve him. One other thing that we don't do is we don't manipulate God's vengeance against someone else. We cannot speak on behalf of God a word of judgment against someone else in speaking in the name of God, because that is not our place. He may exercise vengeance in his time, and he may not exercise vengeance in the time that we think it should be done. But we need to have that confidence that we can trust him, because he's working on a bigger plan that we understand. He will have mercy on whom he has mercy for reasons that we don't understand. And he will allow people to exist and people to be in charge at times when we don't understand it, but he has a purpose. For example, let's read verse 17 and 18, and this will add to what we're talking about here. Verse 17 says, "For the scripture says to Pharaoh, for this very purpose I have raised you up, that I may show my power in you, that my name may be declared in all the earth. Therefore he has mercy on whom he wills, and whom he wills he hardens." So if we look back at those instances there, the Pharaoh of Egypt was hardened against the Hebrews that were the children of Israel that were in the land of Egypt at that time. But it was for a purpose. God knew how Pharaoh was treating the Hebrews, but he had a greater plan than they understood at that time. His plan was to use Pharaoh to make his name known. So when God called Moses to go before Pharaoh and say, "Let my people go," what we saw was that Pharaoh hardened his heart. The land of Egypt was cursed with the plagues. Then when eventually the Pharaoh decided to let the Hebrews go, they left, they went through the Red Sea, and Pharaoh's armies were drowned in the sea. Now that did a couple of things. That not only showed the deliverance of God for the people of Israel, the people that he chose, but it also showed that he could exercise vengeance on behalf of those people when Pharaoh and his armies were swallowed up by the Red Sea. Well, this came to be known among the other peoples when the Hebrews left and went into the land of promise. What God had done on their behalf was made known, and it put a fear in the peoples as to what happened to that nation of Egypt and the armies of Egypt. It put a fear in them where they revered, out of a sense of fear, the God of Israel, and it caused them to have second thoughts about what they may do. Also, we can recall that when the Hebrews, the children of Israel rebelled against God, God used Nebuchadnezzar to lead the Israelites into exile, and that was their punishment. So God used Nebuchadnezzar, he raised up Nebuchadnezzar to take the Israelites into exile, and then he raised up Cyrus to allow the Israelites to go back to Israel. So we see that God has a greater plan than we may understand. And why does he have this plan? Well, there's one thing that we have to consider, that God knows that we don't know. And what it is God knows the heart of the individual and the heart of people. He knows what they will do. He knows the decisions that they will make. And he shows mercy, and he uses the people that are on this earth to work out his purposes. There's nothing that'll stop those purposes. God is working on a bigger plan than we can understand, because he knows the hearts of all men. Therefore, it's in our best interest to put our trust in God, because that places us in a good position with him. Rather than trusting our own wisdom and our own knowledge and things like that, and making judgments based on our intellect, if we have confidence in God and we trust him to operate on our behalf and to do things on our behalf, that puts us in a very good position. Rather than trusting our own intellect and our own so-called wisdom, we trust the wisdom of God, and that will work for us as long as we walk in obedience to what he has for us. In the same way that God worked out for Israel what was in their best interest, even using the Pharaoh of Egypt, Nebuchadnezzar, Cyrus, God worked out by choosing what was not common to man at that time. He chose Isaac, and he chose Jacob instead of the firstborn. God knew what he was doing, and he had a plan. So what does that say to us? What does that lead us to do that we should do? Well, first, we need to come to a knowledge of God. We need to develop that relationship with him, know who he is, be able to trust him, and be able to put our desires and our concerns on him. All he desires is for us to come to a knowledge and to a relationship with him. And if we serve the Lord, if we make Jesus Lord of our life, and we put our life and our hope in the hand of God, we will not be disappointed. So that's what I want to encourage everybody to do today, is in all aspects of life, we need to put our hope and our confidence and our trust in the Lord. If we do that, we won't be disappointed. It may not always be the easiest route, but it will be the route to blessing and the route to peace and happiness, and we'll be able to walk in that knowledge of God, and that he has our best interest in mind. So with that, we're going to close today, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. So everybody, have a good day.